date of the next federal election hasn't even been announced yet, but already it's turned into an auction with you and me being the thing up for sale. Anthony Albanese and Peter Dutton are eagerly bidding to buy your vote with ever larger spending promises, promising to spend your money. The fact that our politicians try to buy our votes with our own money says bad things about them, but the fact that we let them says even worse things about us. My name's Topher Field, this is the Topher Project, and I help people like you to understand the world as it changes around us. And with an election just months away, it is no secret that both the Liberal and Labor parties are well into election mode. But honestly, is this it? Is this really who we're going to choose between? All we're seeing so far is look at me spending promises which deepen our already serious financial woes, combined with visionless, small target politics. Once upon a time, if there were big spending promises, there were at least big visionary infrastructure projects to go with them. But now, we're being promised debt funded handouts for consumption to help with the cost of living when it was the government that made our lives so expensive in the first place. And before you come at me with claims about how both the Liberal and Labor parties have multi-billion-dollar housing construction funds, or about how the Liberal Party have a nuclear big build, and that's exactly the kind of big thinking infrastructure project that I'm claiming they don't have, not so fast. Government created the housing shortage in the first place, and government is the reason that our energy is increasingly expensive and unreliable. So forgive me if I don't feel like saying thank you when they promise to spend billions of my dollars only partly fixing something that they broke. Let's go through some of the key promises made so far, one by one, just to take stock of how truly awful our politics has become. On the Labor side, Albanese has gone big on cost of living subsidies, including yet another energy subsidy, this time another $150, or by my calculations, about 11 days' worth of electricity consumption for my family, given that I also run a power-hungry studio in my house. But this is not the first time Treasurer Jim Chalmers has splashed the cash in the name of energy price relief. And I don't know about you, but I don't feel very relieved right now. I mention the energy issue up front because it really is emblematic of the state of Australian politics across the board. We've had more than half a dozen prime ministers in the last 20 years, and any one of them could have solved this issue at any point by rejecting net zero nonsense and prioritising cheap, renewable energy, irrespective of carbon emissions. The cost of electricity is 100% the fault of our politicians. We are the ones paying for their stupidity, and yet we're also the ones who have to pay for their relief. Can I just point out for a moment the insanity of any form of welfare for everyone? Because where does that money come from? They take $150 from everyone and they give it to everyone. How exactly is that helping? Like I said, the fact that they make promises like this says bad things about them, but the fact that we fall for it says terrible things about us. And the Liberal Party plan to build nuclear energy is arguably a long-term solution, so I'll at least give them a partial credit for having a plan that does actually, eventually, fix the problem. But Australia has abundant supplies of brown and black coal, which was and still is the cheapest form of baseload energy production known to man, churning out reliable power day and night come rain, hail or snow for about 6 cents per kilowatt hour, sometimes less. Now, the retail price of electricity is about 6 times higher than that, partly because we do also have to pay for the infrastructure, the poles and the transformers, etc. So some of that increase over the wholesale price is fair enough. But during periods of peak demand, when wind and solar are not delivering electricity, the price can spike to as much as $15 per kilowatt hour, which is the cap. And that happens because demand gets high and unreliable renewables aren't delivering. Meanwhile, coal just keeps on chugging away, supplying as much baseload power as it can at 6 cents per kilowatt hour. The problem is there isn't enough of it to keep up with the demand during those peak periods. So, instead of the Labor plan to take $150 office and then hand it back, or the Liberal plan to spend the next 15 to 20 years stuck in lawsuits over locations and battling green slacktivists who are determined, of course, to stop the building of nuclear power plants, we instead need to get busy now building brand new coal-fired power plants right next to the existing coal-fired power plants in the Latrobe Valley and elsewhere. There's space. Most of our power stations are surrounded by hundreds of acres of empty land, and the supply of coal, it's already there, right at the front door. And yes, I know, our existing coal power plants are getting old, and they are, by modern standards, pretty dirty, and we can't extend their operational lives forever, but we don't have to. We just need to get busy building the latest generation high temperature coal power plants with the right sorts of filtration on the exhaust so that there's no issue with soot or particulates. And literally within 5 years, we will have an abundance of the cheapest form of energy known to man. And don't come at me about carbon emissions when China, India, and now the US are all getting busy building way more coal-fired power plants than we've ever had or will ever have. We cannot change the climate in terms of what we do. When it comes to our emissions of CO2 from coal power, it makes no difference, so keep that one to yourself. Now, with all of that in mind, both the Labor and Liberal parties look pretty piss weak, given what the real alternative is, coal, and they should look piss weak because they are. But that's just one issue. Let's talk about housing. Don't expect any good news because, once again, they're just bidding for our vote, using our money, promising to put a band-aid on an arterial bleed that they caused in the first place. The housing crisis is real and it's hurting us all. Obviously, those who can't find a home to rent right now are the hardest hit, but we're all paying for the entirely predictable housing shortage in one way or another. And I say it was predictable because, along with many other observers, I predicted it. The housing crisis isn't new. We were talking about it 25 years ago when John Howard was the Prime Minister, but actually it's existed in one form or another since 1964. And that date is important because I want you to get this. The highest level of home ownership per capita was in 1961. And then, with home ownership at an all-time high in 1964, the government started helping with the first version of a homeowner's grant for $500, equivalent to over $5,000 today. Ever since then, ever since the government started helping homeowners, the home ownership rate has been declining. When I complain about how the government always makes things worse, I'm not talking out of my ass. Everything the government touches turns to crap, and we have the data to prove it, including housing affordability and home ownership. When the government says it's here to help you, look out. It won't surprise you to learn that 35 years after the introduction of that first homeowners grant in the year 2000, the housing situation had gotten way worse, and we were very much talking about a housing crisis. John Howard decided to help by increasing the homeowners grant to $7,000. At the time, it was partly compensation for introducing the GST, but then a year later, he doubled it to $14,000 to help us fight the global financial crisis. But of course, none of these buyers' subsidies helped with the supply, and it's the lack of supply that has driven the housing crisis all along, not a lack of buyers. But in a functioning market, if there's lots of buyers at high prices, we should see suppliers flooding in to try and meet that demand with new supply. In other words, we should have seen a huge increase in construction, but somehow we never did, or at least we saw increases in construction, but not nearly enough to meet the demand. Now, there's a few reasons for this. Certainly, high levels of per capita immigration have ensured that demand has remained insatiable. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Even if immigration had been zero, we would still be talking about a housing crisis. Why? Because government rules and regulations are what has restricted supply and driven costs sky high. Yes, things would not be as bad without immigration, but we would still be talking about housing affordability and a shortage of rentals. And I know this because we were already talking about exactly these things 25 years ago when immigration was a fraction of what it is today. The housing shortage is a government manufactured shortage. So, what are Albanese and Dutton proposing to do about it? Well, they're both talking about housing supply. So, that's a good start, right? Surely this time they've figured out that the government is the problem, should get out of the way and allow the free market to meet the demand for housing, right? You're funny. Labor are promising to spend 32 billion of your dollars building 1.2 million new homes, which sounds great until you do the math. That's less than $30,000 per home. What are they building? A home for ants? The fact is, the private sector will gleefully build all the houses we could ever need, and at a cost far lower than the current typical new price build of $800,000 today. How would it do it? Well, if the government got out of the way and pulled local councils and planners into line as well. For their part, the Liberal Party have promised to spend $5 billion of your dollars subsidising essential infrastructure for new builds, including roads and sewage. And whilst it's great that this money is going to go to actually useful things, which we actually need, the reason houses are so expensive isn't because of all the stuff that we do need. It's because of all the added stuff that we don't. It's the 7-star energy ratings. It's the accessibility standards which are applied to every new build. It's the 3 to 7 years spent in planning just to get the subdivision approved. It's the millions in council costs. We don't fix the absurd cost of building new suburbs by subsidising the things that we do need, the things that the free market will happily pay for because they actually have real value. No, we fix this problem by eliminating all the costs and delays that we don't need, and that means getting government out. So once again, as with electricity, the government is bidding for your vote with your money so that they can put a band-aid on an arterial bleed that they caused in the first place. I could go through healthcare with billions in subsidies for Medicare and pharmaceutical benefit schemes, education with Albanese promising that the federal government will now fully fund every student, as if it's a lack of money that's causing us to slip down the global education rankings when in fact it is the involvement of politicians in the first place. The list goes on. They are bidding in an auction for your vote, but they're bidding with your money, and they're promising to spend that money making things worse and not better. So what do we do about it? Well, in a democracy, we get the government we deserve, so I'm sorry to say it, but we kind of deserve this. This Tweedledee and Tweedledummer routine, it's our fault because we keep rewarding them for doing it. There is no fast way out of this mess. We are not going to fix it this election, not even close, but we can take a step in the right direction. In my opinion, that means choosing to support the minor parties who are in favour of lower taxes, less government, and more freedom, and then only putting the major parties down the middle of your ballot, underneath all of the half-decent minor parties that you can find, but still above the really toxic minors like the Greens, Animal Justice Party, and those guys. I explain how to do this properly in my now infamous Marbles video, and I'll make sure that that is the recommended video at the end of this so that you can find it easily. And sure, even if hundreds of thousands of Australians follow my advice and use their preferential vote, well, it's not going to solve all of our problems immediately. But then again, nothing is going to solve all of our problems immediately. Our housing situation has been going downhill since the 1960s. That's over 60 years. Education? Well, that's certainly been going downhill for decades. Cost of living? It's 20 years at least that's been going backwards. So it's taken us decades to get into this mess, and it will take more than one election to get out of it. But let's at least get started. And we get started by refusing to tolerate these politicians bidding for our votes with our money. Because I've said it before and I'll say it again. These spineless, empty suits we call politicians, the fact that they are bidding for our votes using our money says bad things about them. But the fact that it works, well, that says terrible things about us. It's time we change that. My name's Topher Field, this is the Topher Project, and I help people like you to understand the world as it changes around you. Be sure to watch the Marbles video that should be coming up as a recommended video for you right now. Follow me on all of my socials at Topher Field, and you can get my t-shirts and my books and all of my merch from goodpeoplebreakbadlaws.com. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.